Good afternoon, everybody. I'm David Ball. I'm the chairman and founder of Brand Fuel. We're a creative agency. We're 19 years old and have lots of tech clients and banking organisations. And we look after their brand and reputation at really important moments in their annual calendar. So things like the World Economic Forum, we do a lot of work there. But we also have always had a big purpose space. In 2010, we were one of the founding partners of One Young World, and I think there are probably some people in the room who know One Young World. We did that event with Habas for 4 years, and it continues to be an incredible organisation. And we partnered now, I'm very pleased to say, with the Humanitarian Leadership Academy. And I'm delighted to have with me, and she has all the knowledge, Yanti Sarupto, who is the current president and CEO of Save the Children. And Yanti has spent quite a bit of time in Unilever, so she's got a real commercial sense about what she's done. But she is a long-time member of Save the Children and also has worked at the Leadership Academy. Yanti, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, David, and thank you for having us here.
Keep going.
Hold it. So I've been with Save the Children for about 10, 11 years now. It's one of the largest humanitarian organizations in the world, the one that is independent of governments, secular, and very much focused on children. It's a little older than Brand Fuel. It's about 104 years old. Our founder founded it in 1919 on the back of the First World War, when she thought it was unjust that children in Germany and Austria were starving behind Allied lines. She campaigned for that. She was famously arrested in Trafalgar Square for campaigning for children of the enemy, and was then very soon released by the judge, and he gave her £5, which was the first donation to the Save the Children Fund.
Wow, that's quite a story. So the reason we're here today is that there is a fundamental humanitarian crisis. 1 in 23 of us will experience a crisis of some sort in our lifetime, and that number is getting worse. According to the United Nations Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, it takes around about 53 billion to fund humanitarian need. Guess how much we spend on bottled water annually? $363 billion. 5 times what it would take to fund the humanitarian need. And there is a real crisis because the old system of NGOs and INGO intervention from sort of white supremacist approach is fundamentally broken. It's stuck. And so Yanti and the Humanitarian Leadership Academy have come up with a brilliant idea. And this brilliant idea is to completely rethink a new humanitarian era, and that is called the Humanitarian Exchange. And it's a platform. We've talked about platforms here this morning, about how you democratize finance and money globally. The amazing story of India and how they did that for 500 million people today. Well, this exchange platform is going to do that for humanitarian upskilling and resource. Yanti, tell us just a little bit about the importance of this.
Yeah, that's great. And I think you said it right, and the previous speaker also said the world has enough resources. We're just very unorganized. And we think that that's absolutely true also in the humanitarian sector. Can you imagine, even, let's call it pre-pandemic times, when there is a humanitarian crisis, an earthquake, a war, some form of displacement, there would be an immediate response in country, but we would also send in plane loads of very highly skilled professionals from essentially the global north, the US, the UK, Europe, etc. And to some extent, that is still happening after the pandemic. Of course, we also learned that during COVID, actually not all of that was necessary when we couldn't, and those responses were doing also really well. So really thinking about those frontline responders, who are the first ones there? Well, the people who live in the country where that response is required. The small storeholders in the Philippines and Indonesia that have earthquakes or typhoons every single year. And we know exactly almost when and where these are going to happen. The local law enforcement, the police, the local communities that want to get their life back together, that want their schools to reopen, that need their local supply chain to be reset and back on track as quickly as possible. So that the international community, there will always be support needed in any country. The United States needs humanitarian support when a big event happens here. So all countries will need support, but we'd like to do that as quickly and efficiently as possible. We would much prefer to come in with cash, for instance, so that people can actually spend money in their local economy rather than trying to truck in water and food from other areas of the country or even from abroad. So those times surely should really be over unless in an unbelievable exception. So 10 years ago, it goes to show that there's a long dark night of the innovator, as we know, both in the private sector as well as in the humanitarian sector. 10 years ago, we thought, okay, how do we change this? How do we help people who live on those fault lines sometimes to be ready to respond, even if they're not working for Save the Children or the Red Cross or our humanitarian work per se? And we said, okay, we have all this knowledge, not just Save the Children's knowledge, but from across the sector, the Red Cross, the IRC, World Vision, the UN. Why don't we bundle the best of our knowledge and make that available as a platform for anybody who wants to know? And we called it the Humanitarian Leadership Academy.
Amazing. And how many? What's your global footprint? Numbers of people, numbers of countries?
Yeah. So after 10 years, and I am proud because it was hard and it didn't work in the first instance exactly how we thought it would work. Right? You always make lofty plans and then life sort of kicks you in the face. But we now have a platform that combines all that knowledge. We have, I think, over 700,000 people, online learners. They can also get certifications that they can then use professionally to help them in their further career. 700,000 people across, I believe, how many countries?
195, yeah.
There you go, 195. That's essentially almost every country in the world. And we were delighted to see a huge percentage of those learners actually come from the countries where we know that knowledge is even more required. And that knowledge is free. We also work with over 50 corporate and humanitarian organizations to do bespoke learning programs for their organizations. And of course, their fees, to some extent, allow us to offer access to individuals from those countries for free.
So, with the background of, I think, what academics would call a polycrisis, that is the 4 C's, so climate, COVID, I've forgotten the other 2.
Cost of living.
Cost of living and conflict. That is an enormous burden on the next generation. And how is the exchange going to change and help and assist that? I know this is about localization and upskilling, but what are the resources they need to do that?
Yeah, I mean, people sometimes ask me, is there hope, or what gives you hope, given the sort of the misery Olympics that we deal in? I think one of the things that really gives me hope is the enormous energy of young leaders, young kids, young adults everywhere who really want to change the world and do so sustainably and responsibly. Campaigning tools for them. Save the Children actually helps young leaders campaign. We had a number of them here this week at UNGA. They come up with their own campaigns, right? And sometimes we think, oh, that's a little, on the edge. And that is great, right? That's exactly what we need. So their energy, we support them. We give them tools. They teach us things, of course, that we don't know because they're digitally a lot more advanced than we are. So again, it's a fantastic, symbiotic relationships there. But those young leaders can also come to the Humanitarian Leadership Academy, and there are specific tools on campaigning and also humanitarian work if they want to get into the field and join a Save the Children or a Red Cross or the UN. That's also how they can actually set up their career.
And I think there was a comment I heard earlier about the importance in terms of talent acquisition for corporates. because the generation now values much more highly the values of the places they work. And it's becoming a really positive asset. So what does the private sector actually need to do to support this new era of humanitarianism?
That's right. And it's interesting, actually, most of my meetings in UNGA have been, as always, on the side and actually with a lot of our corporate partners. The Humanitarian Leadership Academy, in its inception, had tremendous support from a number of corporate partners and from the UK government and from other donors. So I think, again, that cross-sectoral support from the get-go. Our best global corporate partners are partners that not only, we shouldn't only go to them for money, they shouldn't only come to us to write a check and note it on their website that they're supporting us for Ukraine. The best ones are the ones that are with us for the long run, where we actually craft joint goals. Partners like GSK, partners like Accenture, we have said we are jointly going to tackle the problem of zero-dose children in the world, of which there are millions. Children that have had zero vaccinations at all. So again, bringing that corporate capability to the table. Accenture helps us with our back office systems. Accenture helps us actually with our creative campaigns. They're the largest creative agency in the world now. So again, a lot of cross-functional, cross-capability that we get from local partners, aside from funding sometimes. Amazon was one of our biggest supporters in the Ukraine response, where we really had to ramp up massively, as you can imagine. Their trucks delivered goods for our teams on the Polish border when it was needed in the moment.
And you mentioned Ukraine. I think you've just come back from a visit to Kyiv.
I have, and outside of Kyiv, I would hasten to add, because Kyiv is not the country. I was there 2 weeks ago. It is an unbelievable situation.
Give us a sense of the good and the bad from a humanitarian perspective.
Yes, and SAFE has been there again since 2014, as and many others. Our team there is 96% completely Ukrainian, unbelievable talent, by the way, unbelievable, highly educated, highly committed talent that we've been able to attract from outside the humanitarian sector. So that's fantastic. We're able to work still in really, really difficult areas. I was able to travel to Mykolaiv and Kherson, very close to the front line, where we're still doing the work. And yes, we do spend time in bomb shelters here or there. If I had to do it in a week, even in a week, I did it 3 times. So to give you a sense of, how still the frequency, not everywhere in the country, but certainly in those hotspot areas. We we run digital learning centers there for children who've been out of school now for almost 4 years. 2 years pandemic, 2 years of war, no school, in-person school. We rebuilt and rehabilitate schools. We put up these digital learning spaces where we allow kids to, yes, be online with their old classroom, which is maybe, thousands of miles away, but they are there with their old classmates and teachers, but also they are in that space where we give them the very needed psychosocial support. They can be kids, they play, they hang out. I saw a bunch of teenagers, they want to hang, right? We have age-appropriate programs there. We give them tablets with offline reading materials in their own language so that they can keep up or sometimes catch up after such a hiatus in education. We help children that used to be in orphanages and help the Ukrainian government to figure out how you get out of those institutions. So the workers, and of course we also do the very much, super early basic response work of food distribution, cash distribution. There's a great infrastructure. There's still a local economy. All of that work can continue. But let me give you one sort of story, because numbers are always like, 1 billion people here or there, 1 million people affected. I spent an hour in a shelter with a principal of a school there, Elena. She was an amazing woman. It was during the day. We were in the digital learning space. Air raid alarm goes off. Kids know exactly what to do, which is a scary thing in and of itself, right? Air raid alarm, they knew what to do. Off to the shelter. We spent an hour in the shelter with the principal, and she told us that she had spent 2 months in that shelter in the beginning of the conflict with 500 people and 80 kids, and how she and the teachers there kept up the learning, the playing, even amidst sitting in essentially a windowless shelter for almost 2 months. And one of the things that she said that will stick with me, she said one of the first times we could get out again into the sun and the guns were silent for a bit, they did a PA, a physical activity lesson. She said instead of laughter and shouting and what you normally have in a school. We have kids, right? That's what you get. She said you only heard the bouncing of the balls. Otherwise, the kids were not talking or laughing or screaming at all. So that is what you see in Ukraine today.
Okay. I think it's really important that we look at what leadership from a humanitarian perspective should look like. And I know that one of the goals that is talked about in the humanitarian exchange is this idea of collaboration and unusual collaboration. Now, we've seen a really good example of what can be achieved at speed. There was a project called Lightspeed. Some of you may know Lightspeed. You all will have benefited from it. Ugur and Özlem were the husband and wife couple who founded BioNTech. And they recognized the need for a vaccine in October 2019. And they converted their cancer mRNA research into COVID research and made themselves experts. And by January, they had the most effective certified vaccine, 95% effective, in partnering with Pfizer. And that's, the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. Now, one of the reasons I raise it is they were horrified about the distribution of vaccines globally. And this is a very major humanitarian problem. And there was a guy from Africa who stood up in this room and said, I was the man charged with procuring 1 billion vaccines for Africa, and I got 5 million. And Ugur and Özlem they said, we were so naive, we had no idea this was going to happen to our work. So they have done something I think is a great example of what needs to happen globally in terms of distribution. They've made something called biocontainers. And biocontainers is a way of taking their research production lab, putting it in containers and dropping it anywhere in the world. So in Africa, in Kigali, there's the first set of biocontainers that they've done out of their own pocket. And they're going to do 2 more in Africa, so that Africa never has to face that problem of trying to source vaccines that the third of the world that's been mentioned so often today consumed. What other examples, Yanti, of where this is? Let's give some people some hope. What's working? What's good?
We actually know a lot of things that are working. And to your biocontainers example, right? Let me just whip out this thing
Come on.
that I prepared earlier. So this is called Plumpy Nut. It's essentially fortified peanut butter. I'm sure there's more technical descriptions of it, but that is what it is. It's a fortified peanut butter. You give it to children that are severely malnourished. And I've seen this, it is transformative. It is like a magic wand. This child that is barely breathing, almost makes no sound. Really malnourished kids make no sound. It is really scary. And they're at death's door. A 2-week course of Plumpy Nut saves them. And it also saves their mental capabilities if you diagnose it on time. This stuff saves lives. We do not have enough manufacturing capability in Africa, where it should be, closest to where it's required, or Asia, or the Middle East, where it is required. Most of this stuff is still made in the global north. For the life of me, I don't understand why. Why are we not investing in businesses that can produce this at cost? It's affordable. A course to save a child's lives for 2 weeks costs between $30 and $50, depending on the country. You have to deliver it, but not through trained doctors. A mother can be taught how to give this.
And just a reminder of a number that Yanti mentioned earlier. There are 363 million people in crisis, in need right now, and 50% of them are children. And there's a simple, investable, incredibly powerful solution sitting right there.
It's investable. We need to think about risk in the humanitarian sector to some extent in the same way that corporates and others, and investors, take risk in the private sector, where it is completely normal. Whereas when people think about, how do we invest or give grants to the humanitarian sector, they think zero risk, not 1 penny can be misspent. Well, let me tell you one thing, that is not going to happen. Things will fail, and push us to be honest and transparent about it, but you have to think about the return you can get. Actually, on this, I actually think there's a financial return possible. Absolutely, I can do the math on that. But the opportunity cost of not doing it, of having children die before the age of 5, of completely preventable causes, and we can't say we didn't know that. We have the means, we have the knowledge, we need political will and some risk appetite to go after that opportunity?
Yeah, so there is a really strong opportunity here, but I want to understand more about how the finances work. So in the INGO and NGO world, they presumably run on an annual basis with their money and their funding. But Janti, give us an insight into what the current situation is and what you would hope it could be.
Yeah, well, that is a good point. So first and foremost, there is, of course, scarcity everywhere. And every business has to cope with that. I know, it's always hard. But humanitarian needs have grown massively over the last 3 years in particular. And humanitarian funding has, in the best case scenario, has probably been the same.
On that, I know that the UN appeal...
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about what's the bad bit about the UN appeal in terms of how the money arrives.
It arrives usually late.
Like a year late.
Sometimes a year late.
Yeah.
I still think not enough of it goes to local partners on the ground, which is imminent. Again, comes back to risk appetite, right? Oh, we don't know those local NGOs in Sudan or Ethiopia. How can we trust them with our money? I mean, that is essentially still underlying it. Bureaucracy of donors is massive. So again, streamlining processes. No corporate partner, I think, would treat their suppliers or their vendors in that way, right? There is no customer survey of how well we are all showing up, including UN agencies, to help our... if there were real consumers, they could walk away from us, right? But they can't. So that's first and foremost. There is scarcity. Some of it is too tight to specific things. And in fluid situations like Ukraine, where you don't know one day to the next whether you can stay in Mykolaiv or you have to withdraw or you have to do this or you have to do that, the flexibility to do what is right in the moment is also not there. And it's done in yearly buckets. Because often, and I understand public accountability, governments have to go back to their electorate. And, American Congress has an annual budget, and so do most governments. So we're responding to 10-year crises in Syria in 10 one-year buckets. So can you imagine what that does to your planning and your strategy?
Well, it's a horrendous situation. And I was just thinking, we've recently had these major disasters. Okay, so the response in Morocco, 2,000 people dead. What should have been happening in Morocco for them to be able to help themselves in a better way?
I would say, a global mechanism to immediately surge in money, cash, in a flexible way, yes, to a government and to organizations that are on the ground, local ones, international ones, a combination. Yes, there has to be accountability. So by all means, ask us to report on how we spend the money. Do we spend it well? Do we spend it on time? Do we have compliance and quality? Is it leading to impact and good outcomes, right? Absolutely. But do it quickly.
There are examples. I'm just thinking of the Kiva platform that Jessica Jackley set up, which has an unbelievable list of NGOs that loan money. And they've raised, I think, in loans over 1.5 billion over time. But I'm wondering about... what can we're launching this new platform, the Humanitarian Exchange. How can that help to facilitate faster, better response? And what does it need in terms of corporate and privately funded or private sector backing and support?
Yeah, I think what we're trying to do with the Humanitarian Exchange is to really call on partners who want to get involved to think about what capabilities do you have to help humanitarian action. If a lot of the 700,000 people that are taking courses on the HLA on the platform today are better equipped to respond, so they can respond in their own countries. We could even think about surge rosters then that could respond in other countries, particularly if it's in the region of that response. So that helps. So human capital development is essentially what the Humanitarian Leadership Academy was set up to do. What we would love to see in the Humanitarian Exchange is to also bring in partners from outside the humanitarian industry to come with their capabilities, their human capital, to help us think about, can we scale it up your data and digital capabilities. Can you help us bring the Humanitarian Leadership Academy to even more people, faster, more efficiently, more effectively? Can you help us with how we message? How do we communicate and market that opportunity for people? I mean, there's plenty of other ideas, I'm sure, that would come up if people engage in the humanitarian exchange, at least that is what we hope would come out of it.
And we talked about unusual collaborations in technology, and there's a lot of conversations going on around artificial intelligence. Google has an amazing free piece of AI that predicts two things: wind direction for fires globally, and floods, particularly around India. And they've shared that. But I can't help but imagine what would happen if Google and Microsoft worked together and used their combined AI power and knowledge for good. And I'd love to see that in the exchange.
I completely agree. So, as they say, pre-competitive coalitions are really where it's at for us. And that is a great example, right? Because if we know where a fire is going to hit, could we even do anticipatory action? We've been trialing that in a number of countries.
Get the money there quickly.
Get the money there before the event happens, before goods become incredibly expensive because of the scarcity. Yeah. It allows people sometimes to store away their assets. It sometimes allows people to move away on time, actually. So anticipatory action is a fantastic idea, but it would require those kinds of data and digital insights that we can get from phenomenal partners like that.
Yeah, I'm going to suggest that if anybody has any questions, get those in your heads. We might have a couple of minutes just to take a couple of questions from the floor.
We'll also take offers.
2 minutes. Okay, if anyone's got a question, now's the time. Don't worry if you haven't. So, in summary, we've got 2 minutes. What would you want from this amazing, powerful set of people in this room to support the summit in February in London and the Humanitarian Exchange?
I think, be curious. Suspend disbelief. Come and join us. Come with energy. Come with risk appetite. And come with big ideas.
That sounds pretty good to me. I want to thank you all for your time and your energy. We are here for the rest of the afternoon if you want to have a chat with us. Thank you very much. And thank you so much to Leaders on Purpose and to Krista and Tatiana for having us.
Thank you.